Tonight, we're going somewhere different. Not far in time, but impossibly far in feeling. A place where a single sunrise could erase everything you knew. Where language, law, and loyalty meant less than the name written in your family's prayer book. You're Jewish. And it's Europe. And the year is 1939. Before we begin, take a breath. This one's heavier. But history doesn't ask us for comfort. It just waits for us to listen. Dim the lights. Settle into the quiet. And prepare to wake up in the wrong place, at the wrong time, through no fault of your own. You open your eyes and you already know something's off. The air feels thinner somehow, like it's been holding its breath. It's a late summer morning, but your skin prickles. The sun shines, but it doesn't reassure. This is Poland, or maybe Hungary, maybe Austria, recently annexed. It doesn't matter. You're Jewish. That's the part that matters now. You're in your bed. A modest one if you're lucky. A shared one if you're not. There's a wool blanket, scratchy and warm, passed down from someone who slept under it during the last war. The big one. The one they said would be the last. There's a photo frame on the dresser. Your father's wedding, your mother's favourite cousin, the dog they weren't supposed to have, but did anyway. All of it real, all of it temporary. Outside, the world still pretends to function. You hear footsteps on cobblestones, the occasional shout of a neighbour haggling over bread, the rumble of a delivery cart, the whistle of a train far off. But it's quieter than it should be. Like the city is trying not to be noticed. There's been talk, of course. Of course there's been talk. There's always talk, until it's not talk anymore. First, it was rumours in the synagogue, then whispers in school, then notices on the walls. New laws, new restrictions, new words for old fears. And then the signs appeared in windows. Jews not welcome. They started small. Shopkeepers you knew. But then banks, doctors' offices, theatres. You started crossing the street before you reached the door. Just to save time. And face. Your father used to laugh at it. That dry, resigned chuckle that fathers have when they want to pretend it's not serious. We've been through worse, he'd say. They need someone to blame. They always do. It passes. Except this time it didn't. This time the laws weren't just written in newspapers. They were sewn onto your sleeve. You stretch and hesitate. Not out of laziness, out of calculation. Every movement has weight now. Do you go to the store today? The one that still lets you in? Or do you ask the neighbour's boy to fetch what you need, knowing it puts him at risk? Do you leave your yellow star visible like the law says? Or do you tuck it under your coat and pretend you're invisible? Your mother is already awake, hands red from scrubbing laundry in cold water. She still believes that if she keeps things clean enough, orderly enough, respectable enough, maybe they'll see you as people. Maybe they'll remember. Your little sister hums a song in the kitchen. It's something she learned before the teachers were replaced, before Jewish children weren't allowed in public schools, before your books were confiscated, your history erased, your language called unpatriotic. You used to speak Yiddish with your grandfather. Now he barely speaks at all. Your uncle left months ago. Paris, maybe. Or Buenos Aires. The letters stopped coming. You hope that's because he's busy. You know it's not. You get dressed. Carefully. Clothes chosen not for style, but for neutrality. Nothing too fine. You don't want to look like you're showing off, but not too shabby either. You don't want to look like a vagrant. It's a thin line between respectable and suspicious, and that line moves every day. The streets are watching you now. Every passerby a potential informer. every glance a measurement. How Jewish do you look? How Jewish do you sound? You learned long ago that Jewish is not just a religion. Not anymore. It's your face, your hands, your surname, your existence. You walk to the bakery, or try to. The old one is closed, boarded up. The family that owned it was taken somewhere for relocation. You know what that means even if no one says it. There's a new shop now. Same bread, different hands. The man behind the counter doesn't meet your eyes. He takes your ration ticket like it's poison. Drops your loaf on the counter like it's contagious. No words, just silence and shame, passed back and forth like change. You clutch the bread tightly. You walk fast. You avoid eye contact. You do everything right. It still feels wrong. On the way home, you pass the synagogue. It's not a synagogue anymore. It's a warehouse now. Or a barracks. Or a ruin. They smashed the windows last spring. They took the Torah scrolls. You saw a boy try to save one once. They beat him until he stopped moving. The scroll too. You used to sit in the back row, legs dangling, bored out of your mind during services. Now you dream of that boredom, of the smell of candle wax and old books, of the voices rising in unison, even when they were off-key. Now your prayers are whispered, or mouthed, or kept inside. You get back home and find your father at the table, reading the same newspaper over and over, like it might change if he stares hard enough. The headlines speak of nationalism, purity, destiny. The subtext is louder. You're not part of it. You never were. A new decree is coming. There's always a new decree. No radios, no bicycles, no pets, no parks, no university, no phone, no property, no voice, no complaint, no future. But the most dangerous thing they've taken is predictability. You don't know which day will be the last normal one. And that turns every morning into a question. Every knock into a threat. The police are different now. Not the familiar ones who used to wave. These wear different uniforms. Speak a different language. Walk like they own your breath. They don't ask questions. They already decided the answers. One walks past your door. You freeze. It's instinct. Your heart pounds. You rehearse alibis you don't need yet. You wonder where your papers are. You wonder if they still matter. He keeps walking, for now. You sit at the table. You eat a thin slice of bread. Your sister asks if you'll visit Aunt Rivka today. You say no. Aunt Rivka doesn't live there anymore. The building is empty. Or full of someone else. The line between the two is blurry. The sun starts to set. It always does. That part hasn't changed. But even twilight feels cautious now. Like it's checking for permits before it darkens the sky. You light the candle. Quietly. Carefully. You don't draw the curtains. Someone might report it. Sabbath begins. Your mother says the blessing with a tremble in her voice. Not because she's afraid of God. Because she's afraid of the neighbours. The wax melts. The shadows stretch. You're still here. That's something. Not safe. But here. The word papers doesn't sound scary yet. But it will. Right now, they're just part of the background noise. Identification. Citizenship. Family records. School certificates. Residency permits. The little documents that say you exist and someone somewhere has approved of that fact. But in this time, in this place, those little papers become a lifeline or a noose. You wake to find your father hunched over the dining table again. Not eating, not praying, just reading. Not the news, because there is no real news anymore, but the notice pinned to the bulletin board near the market. He copied it down yesterday, word for word, in a hand that shook too much to be useful. Your last name isn't there, not yet, but that doesn't mean anything. The notice says all Jews must report to the local registry office with identity cards, birth certificates, and proof of residence by Monday. No exceptions. You already know this won't go well, because the papers you have aren't good enough. Not anymore. 2 months ago, your cousin tried to renew his work permit. He had every form in triplicate, everything stamped and signed. He was still turned away. The clerk behind the glass didn't even look up from his sandwich, just said, "You people don't qualify anymore." You people, that's what it's become. Not individuals, not families, not neighbours or classmates or regulars at the bakery. Just a collective, disqualified in bulk. You shuffle through the drawer anyway. It's always the same drawer. Everyone has one. A ragged envelope tucked under old receipts and birthday cards from years when birthdays still felt safe. Your mother labelled it important. It used to hold her marriage licence. Now it holds desperation. The documents are there, most of them. Some frayed at the corners. Some already outdated. Your birth certificate still says your name. Still spells it correctly. Still lists a country that may no longer exist. Borders shift like tides now. Your school papers are useless. Your university enrolment revoked 2 weeks after they banned Jewish students. That letter is there too, neatly typed, signed with indifference. You pick up your work permit. It expired last month. There's no renewing it. The factory changed owners. The new ones didn't need Jews. Or rather, they needed them unpaid and disposable. You place everything in a folder. Carefully, reverently. Like it's a shield, even though you know it isn't. Your father adds his papers. Then your mother. And finally your sister, who doesn't really understand what's happening, but knows it's serious. Because no one is smiling. And the grown-ups are whispering. When you walk to the registry, the line wraps around the block. No one speaks. There are no complaints, just faces turned downward, eyes darting from window to cobblestone to soldier and back again. Every few minutes, someone exits the building in silence. Their shoulders tell the story. The lucky ones look confused. The unlucky ones don't make eye contact. It's your turn. You step forward. The clerk doesn't look at you, just holds out a hand. You place the folder down. He flips through it like he's skimming a menu he's already memorised. "Not enough," he says. You ask what's missing. Proof of relocation. You explain you've lived in the same apartment since you were born. "Exactly," he says. "That's the problem." A stamp is pressed onto your father's document. Red ink. It bleeds through the page. Something about restricted zones. About final registration. About a reassignment letter that will arrive in due course. You're sent home with a receipt. Not permission. Not protection. Just proof that you were here. That you complied. For now. On the walk back, your father doesn't speak. He just holds the folder tight to his chest. Like the warmth of it might preserve something. Memory, maybe. Or legitimacy. At home your mother's already packing. Not bags, just the hallway. Removing anything that might be seen as a luxury. A set of silver spoons from her grandmother. A wool shawl. A violin. Not because you're moving, but because it's safer if the soldiers don't see these things. The fewer questions they ask, the better. A neighbour stops by. She doesn't stay long. Just long enough to say she can't be seen with your family anymore. Her husband's worried about his job. She leaves behind a jar of pickled beets and her apology. You thank her anyway. You boil potatoes. You eat in silence. You don't talk about the papers anymore. because they no longer prove anything. 2 nights later, there's a knock at the door. Not loud, not frantic, just deliberate. 3 times. It's 2:14 in the morning. You hear the breath catch in your mother's throat. Your father doesn't ask who it is. He just opens the door slowly. 2 men in uniform, not from your city, not from your country. They hold out a list. Your name is on it. You ask why. They don't answer. You're allowed 10 minutes to pack. 1 bag per person. No valuables, no pets, no explanation. You take the papers. Of course you do. They've never helped before, but it feels wrong not to. Like stepping outside without your own name. You also take your shoes. Not your best pair. Those might be stolen, just the sturdy ones. The ones with cracked soles and uneven laces. The ones that can walk long distances. You don't know where you're going. No one tells you. But you know you'll be walking. They escort you to the truck. You're not the only ones. Inside, families sit close together, shoulders pressed into ribs, eyes wide open. No crying, not yet. Crying uses energy, and you need all of it. The truck drives slowly. Through the city, past the bakery, past the registry, past everything that used to mean home. You don't speak. There's nothing to say that wouldn't break something. Eventually the truck stops. You're unloaded. A new building. Plain. Fenced. Patrolled. There are rooms but no privacy. Rules but no explanations. They call it a transitional housing arrangement. You call it what it is. The beginning of something. You wait, days pass, maybe weeks. You sleep on straw. You eat bread that tastes like regret and soup that tastes like nothing. Each morning a new notice. No letters. No walking past the gate. No visits from the outside. Someone whispers that a new train arrived yesterday. From the west. It brought more people. It took some away. You ask where. They shrug. The answer is always the same. East. That word becomes its own language, a direction and a sentence, a prayer and a curse. One afternoon a boy from your neighbourhood shows up. He doesn't recognise you at first. His head is shaved. His shoes are gone. His papers were taken and never returned. He laughs when you mention them. Papers? He says. They don't care about papers. They just care if you look tired. And he does. You all do. That night you sit by the window, what little of it there is, and try to remember your school teacher's face. The one who taught you how to write your name in cursive. How to label maps. How to read between the lines. You wonder if she remembers you now. If she still teaches. If she still speaks your name out loud. The moon is out. It doesn't care where your documents are. It doesn't care what your last name is. It shines on you anyway. Like it did before. Like it might still. Even after everything. There's a kind of silence you only hear when thousands of people have been forced into one place and told not to make noise. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like compression. Like everyone's holding their breath and no one's sure when they're allowed to let it out. That's the sound of the ghetto. You arrive just before sunrise, though time is beginning to lose its grip on you. Days don't matter here. Not in the way they used to. The guards count them maybe. You don't. You count meals, rumours and disappearances. The street you used to walk down to visit your aunt is now surrounded by wooden walls and barbed wire. Same cobblestones, different perimeter. It's been repurposed, redesigned for containment, not community. And now it contains you. Your family is assigned a room, not a home, not an apartment, a room, 10 feet by 10, A sink that doesn't run. A mattress that used to belong to someone else. They didn't leave it voluntarily. No kitchen, no heat, no explanation. Just walls. Thin ones. Your neighbour is a widow with a bad cough. You hear her every night. You hope it's not tuberculosis. You hope it's something survivable. Hope is currency here. So is silence. So is not asking questions you don't want answered. Food is distributed once a day, if you're lucky. A crust of bread. Some watery soup. You learn to eat slowly, even when your stomach screams at you. Chewing becomes a ritual. You savour texture, even when it's unpleasant. Even when it's mouldy. Your mother trades her wedding ring for a few extra potatoes. Your father tries not to look when she does it. That ring was the only thing he still called ours. Every morning, people line up for work assignments. The lists are posted on a wall, handwritten in ink that smudges when it rains. Names go up. Sometimes they come off again. No one asks why. You just pray to see your own. Work means food. Work means permission to leave the ghetto for a few hours. Work means a uniform, a number, and a better chance at staying alive. Your number is called, you're assigned to a textile factory, or what's left of one. Half the machines are broken, the other half are louder than your thoughts. You sew buttons onto uniforms. They don't tell you who the uniforms are for. You don't ask, you already know. The walk there is quiet, always guarded, always tense. Your feet hurt, your back hurts. You keep going, because you've seen what happens to the ones who stop. Your sister isn't old enough to work. She tries to help anyway. She picks bits of fabric off the floor and saves them in a tin. She says she wants to sew you a scarf. You tell her not to waste thread. She tells you it's not a waste. You still have your papers. You carry them in your coat, sewn into the lining. You don't know why anymore. They don't get you anywhere. They don't protect you. But holding them feels like holding on to the idea that someone might still see you as a person. The ghetto has a school, technically, a single room, a volunteer teacher. No supplies, no chalk, no chairs. The children sit on the floor and learn multiplication from memory. There are no textbooks, just whatever their minds can hold on to. You volunteer to help once a week. It reminds you of who you used to be. Someone who knew things. Someone who read poetry. Someone who had plans. At night, you dream of trains. Not the loud, clattering kind that used to take you to the lake in the summer. These are different. Slower. Heavier. Always arriving. Never leaving. Sometimes the guards come into the ghetto without warning. They walk the streets like they own them. Which they do. They knock on doors. Sometimes they take people. Sometimes they take things. Sometimes they don't knock at all. One night, they come for your neighbour. The one with the cough. They say she's been relocated for health reasons. No one believes that. She doesn't even bring a coat. You never see her again. In the morning, a child finds a spoon in the street. He picks it up and puts it in his pocket. Not for sentiment, for survival. A spoon is valuable now. It's not about food. It's about not burning your fingers. You hear rumours. There's a place called Treblinka, a place called Belzec, a place called Auschwitz. You don't know what happens there, but you know enough to be afraid of the names. One day, someone smuggles in a newspaper. Old, but still dangerous. It speaks of mass graves, of disappearances, of final solutions. You read it in secret, one page at a time. You fold it into your coat when you're done. You don't tell your parents. They don't need more weight to carry. The rabbi still holds services, quietly, in a cellar. The Torah scroll is smuggled in pieces, one section at a time. It was hidden in flour sacks, behind bricks, in hollowed-out walls. You attend when you can. The words are the same, but your voice shakes when you say them. Not from disbelief, from sheer fatigue. Your sister asks if she'll have a bat mitzvah. You tell her yes, of course. You don't tell her that celebrations have been outlawed. You don't tell her there's no wine, no bread, no candles, no guests. You don't tell her that bat mitzvahs don't happen here. Instead, you teach her the blessing quietly, at night, whispering Hebrew in the dark. Each syllable a rebellion. Winter arrives early. There's no insulation, no coal, no firewood. You huddle together under one blanket. You wear your coat to bed, and your shoes, just in case you have to leave in a hurry. Frost crawls across the window like a warning. The air inside is colder than the air outside. You stop washing. The water's too cold. The lines for the communal well are too long. Lice become a part of life. So do infections. So do funerals. There's no burial ground inside the ghetto. The bodies pile up, covered in sheets, or not. The burial committee does what it can. Your sister asks why the neighbours aren't coming back. You lie. Again. It's easier than the truth. A new decree arrives. A curfew. Earlier. Work permits must now be renewed weekly, not monthly. Identification numbers must be displayed more prominently. Everyone over the age of 12 must report for medical inspection. You ask what the inspection is for. No one answers. You think about running, escaping, finding someone on the outside, someone to hide you. You know stories of children hidden in barns, of families in cellars, of false identities, of sympathetic priests and bribed station guards. But they are just stories. You've never met anyone who came back. Still, one night, you ask your father, "Should we try?" He doesn't look up from the table. "We shouldn't have to," he says. He's right, but being right doesn't keep you alive. The next morning, a train whistle echoes through the ghetto. It doesn't stop. You don't hear the knock at first. It's soft, almost polite. The kind of knock someone might use when arriving for tea. Except no one arrives for tea anymore. And polite knocks don't exist in ghettos. Not when the uniforms are involved. It comes again. A little louder. Deliberate. Just 3 raps. And then silence. Your whole family freezes. You don't plan it. You don't agree on it. But something primal kicks in. Everything stops. Your mother reaches for the coat that's already laid out. Not to put it on, just to hold it. Your father steps forward like he's going to open the door, then hesitates. No one breathes. You already know what it might be. There's no warning system, no siren, no posted notice. Just names on a list you're never allowed to see, and a knock that tells you it's your turn to disappear. You hear shuffling outside. Voices? Not loud, not angry, just firm, professional, which makes it worse. There's something terrifying about that calm, methodical tone. Like they're not angry at you, just efficient. Your sister squeezes your hand. Her fingers are cold. So are yours. The door opens. Not because you want it to, but because they let themselves in. There are 2 men, same as last time, different faces, same posture. Not from here, that much is obvious. Their coats are clean, their boots polished, their voices unhurried. They carry clipboards. One of them says your last name. Not like a question, like a confirmation. Your father answers. The man nods. He doesn't look at you, just begins reading from a form. You are being relocated. Immediately. You are permitted to bring 1 bag per person. No valuables, no books, no pets. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of privileges. You ask where? The man doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. You've heard it enough by now. East. That's all they ever say. Your mother moves quickly. She always does. She packs bread, a little sugar, 2 scarves, a family photo. She wraps it in a handkerchief and presses it against her chest. Not for warmth, for memory. Your sister grabs her doll. You grab your shoes. You put on 2 pairs of socks. You already know the cattle cars are cold. The man with the clipboard tells you to hurry, but he doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. He has the authority of someone who knows you have nowhere to run. Outside, the street is lined with families, all doing the same dance. Bags zipped, coats buttoned, eyes lowered, children too quiet for their age. You join the line. The air smells like fear, and smoke, and resignation. You pass your neighbour's house. She isn't coming. She left last month. Or maybe it was last week. Time doesn't stretch anymore. It folds. The trucks are waiting. Covered beds. Barred sides. Guards with rifles and cigarettes. They don't speak. They just point. You climb in. The metal floor is cold. You hold your sister's hand and she doesn't let go. The truck begins to move. No one cries. Not yet. Crying implies you have time to grieve. Right now, you're just trying to keep track of each other. Someone whispers a prayer. Not aloud. Just under their breath. Words they learned as children. Words they never thought they'd say again. You don't recognise the road, not because you've never been on it, but because nothing looks familiar when you know you're not coming back. Eventually the truck stops. A station. Old, abandoned. Guards herd you toward the tracks. There's a train, not a passenger train, not one with seats or compartments, just cars, freight cars, box cars, the kind used for cattle and coal. You don't want to go inside. No one does, but you do. Because the alternative is worse. They pack you in tight. No windows, no lights, no air, no room to sit, barely room to stand. You feel bodies pressed against yours. You hear a baby cry once, then stop. Someone begins to hum. Maybe to calm the child. Maybe to calm themselves. The doors slam shut. You don't see it. You hear it. Steel against steel. Final. The train begins to move. Slow at first, then faster. You lose your balance. You fall against someone you don't know. They don't mind. There's no room for apologies. Time passes. You don't know how much. The smell becomes unbearable. The floor is wet. You don't want to know from what. You think about the room you used to live in. The bed. The cold water tap. The squeaky drawer. It wasn't much, but it was yours. Now you belong to the train. Eventually it stops. The doors open. You blink against the light. There are more soldiers, dogs, fences, and a sign. You try to read it, but your eyes are still adjusting. Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. You know what that means now? It means you're not going home. The air smells like smoke before you even know where it's coming from. Thick, acrid, clinging to your clothes, your lungs, your memories. You don't know what they're burning yet. You will. You're pulled off the train with the others. Not gently, not cruelly either. Just indifferently. That's what hurts more. You're not important enough to hate, you're just logistics. The guards shout in a language that some people don't understand. That's fine. Understanding doesn't change anything. You move when you're told to move. You stop when you're told to stop. You're herded into a long line that coils and bends like a serpent made of exhaustion. Men to one side, women and children to the other. You reach for your sister. but they're already pulling her away. She's crying now. You are too, but quietly. Always quietly. It's the only rebellion left. Your mother mouths something to you from across the divide. A blessing, maybe? A goodbye? You can't hear it. The guards are yelling too loud. You don't know this yet, but this is the last time you'll see her face. The line leads to a man in a long coat. A doctor, maybe, or someone dressed like one. He doesn't ask your name. He doesn't care about your papers. He looks at your face, your shoes, your hands, your posture. Then he lifts one gloved finger. Left or right, that's it. That's the entire trial. Left means the camp. Right means something else. You go left. You tell yourself that's good. You don't know what right means. You don't want to know. Later, you will. You're taken into a large room. Not a barracks, a processing area. Stripped of everything. Bags, shoes, names. Everything you thought you'd carry through this. They shave your head. Not carefully. Not for hygiene. Just to erase something. Hair is identity. Culture. Dignity. Now it's gone. They give you a uniform, if you can call it that. A striped shirt. Oversized pants. Wooden clogs that don't fit. No underwear. No socks. Just cloth and shame. A number is tattooed onto your forearm. The ink bites deeper than the needle. You will never be referred to by your name again. Only this number. This sequence of digits is now your introduction, your record, your future. You're assigned to a barracks. There's no insulation, no plumbing, no light. Just wooden planks stacked in rows. People lie like firewood, packed shoulder to shoulder. Breathing is a group activity now. So is silence. Your bunkmate is a man from Prague. He used to be a violinist. Now he barely speaks. You hear him hum sometimes in the dark. A melody you don't recognise. It makes you want to cry and you don't know why. You learn the rules quickly. Don't talk back. Don't ask questions. Don't walk too slowly. Don't fall down. Don't look the wrong person in the eye. Don't look like you might die soon. That's the worst thing you can do here. Look unprofitable. The guards hit people for no reason. Or for every reason. For looking up. For not standing straight. For standing straight too proudly. For coughing. For not coughing. For existing. You learn not to flinch. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because flinching invites more. Meals come once a day, if that. A metal bowl passed down a line. Watery soup. A crust of bread. Sometimes the bread has sawdust in it. You eat it anyway. Your body shrinks. Your belt is useless now. Your pants are held up by a piece of string you found behind the latrine. You weigh less every week. And still, you're told to work harder. You're assigned to a labour detail. Digging. Moving stones from one pile to another, then back again. The purpose isn't completion. The purpose is collapse. You dig because if you don't, you'll be dragged to the infirmary. The infirmary isn't for healing. No one comes back from the infirmary. One morning, the man in the bunk below you doesn't wake up. You don't tell anyone. No one does. You need the body warm just a few more hours. Just long enough to avoid questions. You hear stories of showers that aren't showers. Of chimneys that never stop. Of people told they're being relocated, given soap, stripped naked, and then gone. You don't want to believe it. You do anyway. Because the sky is never clear here. The smoke has no schedule. The ash falls like snow. One day, your number is called. You freeze. It's not selection. It's work detail. You're reassigned. You're relieved. That's what it's come to. Relief when the fear is only temporary. The new assignment is in a warehouse, sorting clothes, belts, shoes, baby blankets. They tell you to remove labels, separate fabrics, fold neatly, You find a coat you recognise, not exactly, just familiar. You fold it anyway. You find a pair of shoes too small for any adult. You place them in the bin marked children. You feel nothing. You have to. One evening, a boy collapses near the fence. He was running, trying to reach the other side. You don't know why. Maybe he thought there was food. Maybe he thought there was escape. They shoot him in the back. No one reacts. That night, no one talks. Even the violinist is silent. The days blur. The weeks stretch. Time doesn't move forward here. It just circles. Work, eat, sleep. Work, eat, sleep. One day bleeds into another, and the bleeding never stops. You think less. You remember less. You become less. And that's the point. The camp isn't designed to kill you quickly. It's designed to kill the parts of you that know how to hope. The parts that remember warmth, or music, or questions. You're not free. You're not dead. You're somewhere in between. A living body in a place built for ghosts. Morning comes early. Not because the sun rises, there's barely light to speak of, but because a whistle screams through the camp like a blade through sleep. There's no easing into the day here. No stretching, no groggy blinking, no warm drink in your hand. There's just movement. Immediate. Precise. Or punished. You sit up on the wooden plank that pretends to be your bed. 3 people slept beside you, above you, beneath you. One of them is gone. No one asks where. You hope it was death. That would be easier. The whistle sounds again. Your ribs ache from hunger mostly, from cold, from lying too long in one position, from not being allowed to lie down enough. You swing your legs over the edge, slip your feet into your wooden clogs, and wince. There's a splinter in your heel. You don't remove it. That would mean taking off the shoe. You don't have the time or the luxury of healing. Outside, it's still dark. Snow clings to the fences. Frost bites at your face. You're wearing the same thin, striped uniform you've worn for months. Your bones hurt, your ears burn, your fingers no longer feel. The guard yells, "Appel!" Roll call, you form lines with the others. 5 across, back straight, eyes down, always 5 across. If someone is missing, the entire line is punished. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The man next to you coughs, a wet, rattling sound. Everyone hears it. No one reacts. He'll be gone soon. The roll call can last hours. You stand. In snow, in mud, in heat, in rain, no matter what. If you faint, you're beaten. If you fall, you're dragged away. If you cry, someone spits on you. It's not personal. It's procedure. You learn how to wait with your body shut off. Like a machine. Standing, but not present. Breathing, but not feeling. This is a skill. A survival skill. After roll call, you're marched to your labour assignment. Yours is hauling bricks, not building anything. Just moving them from one pile to another. And sometimes back again. The work has no purpose. That is the purpose. A guard watches every step, rifle in hand. Not for protection, for demonstration. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to slow down. You're not allowed to be. One man drops a brick. The guard doesn't yell. He just walks over and beats him with the butt of the gun. In the face. Over and over. When the man stops moving, they make someone else pick up the brick. The line keeps marching. At midday there's food, if you can call it that. A thin soup. Made from water, boiled cabbage, maybe potato skin. If you're lucky, you get one bowl, no seconds, no utensils. You drink it like a starving dog. The bread comes next, a slice the size of your palm. Hard, dry, flecked with things you don't want to identify. You eat it anyway. You save the smallest crumb for later, just in case there is a later. If you're caught saving food, you're beaten. If you eat too slowly, you're yelled at. If you ask for more, you're ignored. Someone once stole an extra slice. The guards found it in his sleeve. He was hanged. Publicly. And the rest of you were forced to watch. That was the lesson. After the meal, work resumes. Your shoulders are numb. Your fingers crack and bleed. You carry bricks anyway. You try not to look at the towers, at the smoke, but it's always there. A slow, steady column of grey, curling into the sky, carrying pieces of names, of people, of everything. They say the ash settles on the bread sometimes. You eat it anyway. By evening your legs are trembling, your lips are blue. You haven't spoken in hours. There's nothing to say that would make anything better. You're marched back to the barracks. Another roll call. More standing. More counting. More shouting. Then back to the plank. You lie down. There's no blanket. Just body heat. Sometimes that's enough. You think about your sister. You hope she's alive. You hope she's clean. You hope she's warm. You know she isn't. You want to cry, but you don't. Not because you're brave. Because there's no moisture left in your body. Even tears are rationed here. Sleep comes in fits. A foot in your ribs. Someone muttering in their dreams. A scream muffled by a hand. Then silence. You wake hours later to do it all again. This is not a schedule, it's a sentence. The guards have names. But you don't learn them. Names make people real. And nothing about this place is allowed to feel real. You watch the sun rise and wonder how it dares to shine here. You wonder how it can still rise when so many cannot. You wonder if this is what the end of the world looks like. Organised, timed, rehearsed, and still somehow unbelievable. Hunger begins as a whisper. It starts the day you arrive, in a line, holding a bowl, watching the bottom of a pot being scraped clean before it reaches you. The cook shrugs, ladles some water, nods as if that counts. You drink it. Of course you do. But that's just the beginning. Because hunger doesn't stop when you're full. It stops when you've forgotten what full even means. After a week, it becomes a background noise, like the buzz of flies or the ache in your knees. Something constant, something expected. After 2 weeks, it becomes your religion. Every decision, every motion, every word you speak is built around it. You think about food more than you think about God. More than you think about home. More than you think about escape. At roll call you fantasize about bread. Not fresh bread. Not warm, buttered, fluffy bakery bread. Just a crust. Just a heel. Even mouldy. Even stale. At work you imagine potatoes. Not cooked ones. Just raw. Just dirty in the ground. You dream about stealing one, washing it in snow, biting into it like an apple. You'd take the stomach cramps. You'd thank them for the privilege. Your body changes first. Of course it does. It has no choice. You lose your cheeks. Your neck disappears. Your collarbones emerge like warning signs. Your legs turn to sticks, barely enough to hold you up. Your belt becomes a rope, cinched tighter every week. Your ribs press through your shirt. Your hair falls out. Your gums bleed. You develop sores at the corners of your mouth that don't heal. You walk slower. You blink slower. You speak less. It takes too much energy. You learn to ignore the growl in your stomach. It's just noise now. Like boots on gravel. Like distant gunshots. Like the sound of your own name fading. One day someone finds a turnip near the latrine. A turnip. Half rotten. Mud covered. Probably dropped by a guard or a horse. They wash it in their mouth. Chew slowly. Cry. not because it tastes good, but because they remembered what flavour was. That same day, someone else trades their coat for a handful of barley. It's not enough for a meal, but it's something. That night, they sleep without the coat. They don't wake up. The rest of you don't comment. Because it's not a tragedy. It's math. You count calories the way gamblers count cards. Half a slice of bread equals 6 minutes of shoveling before dizziness sets in. A ladle of soup equals another 2 hours standing upright. Steal a second helping, and maybe you live 1 day longer. If you're caught, maybe you don't live at all. You eat everything: mould, peels, bones, bugs. You scrape the sides of your bowl with your finger, then your tongue, then your neighbours if they let you. Some people save crumbs. They hide them in their sleeves, in their shoes, under their tongue. They don't last long. The guards do random checks. If you're found hoarding, they beat you. If you're found stealing, they shoot you. You hear stories of people cutting flesh from the dead. You tell yourself it's a rumour. You hope it is. But you also wonder how hungry they were. How close you are to being them. Sometimes a train arrives. New prisoners, new bodies, new pockets to check for scraps. You hate yourself for hoping they brought food. Once, someone finds a piece of chocolate. Real chocolate. Wrapped in foil. Half melted. He shares it. Tiny slivers. The size of fingernails. You cry as it touches your tongue. You don't even chew. You let it melt. You don't want the taste to end. It's the first real thing you've had in months. The next day, he's gone. You don't know if it was related, it doesn't matter. The hunger stays. The chocolate doesn't. In the evenings, people talk about recipes, their favourite meals, holiday dinners, smells from kitchens that no longer exist. It becomes ritual, a kind of shared hallucination. Someone describes stuffed cabbage. You close your eyes and nod. You've never had it. But in this place, belief is stronger than memory. One man recites his wife's bread recipe from memory. Every step, every ingredient. The group listens like it's scripture. Then someone laughs. Not because it's funny, but because it hurts less than crying. Hunger teaches you things you never wanted to know. What desperation looks like. What betrayal sounds like. What the body can survive, and what the soul cannot. You begin to envy the dead, not for their peace, but for their freedom from this one gnawing pain. And yet you keep eating. The soup, the crust, the air if you have to. Because hunger doesn't end here. It only wins. Unless you wake up again tomorrow. There are no flags in this camp. No meetings. No manifestos. Resistance here doesn't wave banners or light torches or march in unison. It's smaller. Quieter. Something you can hold in your hands without anyone noticing. It begins with a whisper. A phrase passed from bunk to bunk. Not in defiance, but in memory. A math problem. A line from a book. A prayer whispered in a language that used to mean belonging, not danger. You learn that resistance isn't always about fighting back. Sometimes it's just refusing to forget who you were. There's a man in your barrack who was a teacher before all of this. He's missing 2 fingers now. His voice is hoarse, but he remembers poems. Entire stanzas. He recites them at night in the dark, one line at a time. No one speaks while he does it. And you close your eyes and see the classroom again. The wooden desks, the chalkboard, your own handwriting. Terrible cursive and all. It feels like another life. Because it was. The teacher pauses after each line, waits, and then someone repeats it. A second voice? A third? until the verse floats through the cold air like smoke. Not loud enough to be caught, just loud enough to survive. You remember it, you add it to your collection. You now carry 5 lines of poetry in your head. That's 5 more than the guards can take from you. There's a woman in another block who used to be a midwife. No one says her name out loud, but when someone falls ill, she appears. She carries a scrap of soap, a piece of cloth, a boiled potato mashed into paste. It's not medicine, but it's care. And that's enough to call it rebellion, because you weren't supposed to matter anymore. There's a boy who sings when no one is listening. He hums under his breath while scrubbing floors. He thinks no one hears him. He's wrong. The melody is old, a lullaby. You hum it now, too, not aloud, just in your head. You don't remember the words, but the tune is enough. You learn to write again. Not with pens, not on paper. Those are long gone. Instead you traced letters on your own arm. Aleph, Bet, Gimel. The Hebrew alphabet becomes your prayer. You don't say it aloud. You don't need to. Sometimes you draw the shapes in the dust on the floor. Quick, before anyone sees, before the wind or a boot wipes them away. You're not trying to send a message. You're trying to remember your name. That's the first thing they took from you, and the one thing they fear you might take back. Someone smuggles in a pencil stub. It's barely longer than a fingernail. It becomes treasure. They use it to write a single word on the wall of the latrine. Zachar. Remember. The guards don't notice. Or maybe they don't care. But you do. You see it every day. Sometimes it fades. Sometimes someone rewrites it. No one knows who. Doesn't matter. The word stays. There are rumours of people escaping. Hiding in nearby woods. Finding partisans. You don't know if it's true. You believe it anyway. Belief is resistance, too. There's a woman who saves crumbs. Not for herself, for someone else. Anyone else. She gives them to the children first, then the sick, then the old man who can't stand anymore. No one tells her to, no one thanks her. But they remember her face. You hear that someone smuggled in a Torah scroll once, just a piece of it, wrapped in rags, hidden in a bucket of coal. They read it, slowly, by candlelight. Each letter a miracle, each verse a heartbeat. You never saw it, but the story alone warms you, because stories are fuel. There are other ways people fight back. A joke told in secret, a stolen pencil, a remembered recipe, a name whispered in the dark. One night, someone says Kaddish, the mourner's prayer. You're not sure for who. Everyone, probably. It's dangerous. But the words still come. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah. You mouth the rest, silently. Tears sting your eyes. You don't wipe them. You let them fall. That's resistance too. Refusing to harden completely. Refusing to become what they want you to be. Empty. You're still human. Even here. Especially here. You still know the names of cities, of holidays, of your cousins. You still remember the sound of your mother's voice when she lit candles on Friday nights. That too is rebellion. Memory. Hope. A tiny ember hidden in your ribs. No one sees it, but it burns anyway. You don't end up there by accident. They choose you. That's the first part. They come down the rows during roll call, sometimes mid-meal, sometimes in the middle of the night, clipboard in hand. A name, a number, a gesture. You. Not you. You. The selection isn't random. It never is. They look for traits, not just strength anymore, or weakness. They look for twins, dwarfs, albinos, pregnant women, children with unique eyes, uncommon birthmarks, rare bone structures. You think uniqueness might save you. You learn it doesn't. They tell you it's medical, that you're helping science, that it's important work. You almost laugh. You wish you had the energy. They call it the infirmary, or sometimes the clinic. But it's not for healing. It never has been. The floors are too clean. The instruments too cold. The face is too curious. You walk inside and your name is already gone. You're a specimen now. A test. A variable. You try to meet their eyes. They don't look back. They don't need to. To them, you're not a person. You're an opportunity. You sit on a metal table. Bare. Shivering. They don't give you a gown. Just orders. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't resist. You don't. Because you've seen what happens when someone does. They begin with questions. Polite ones. About your health. Your parents. Your background. You don't answer. Not because you're defiant, but because you're afraid of giving the wrong answer. There is no right answer. They test your blood, your bones, your reflexes. They write notes. Sometimes they smile while they do it. That's the part you can't forget. They draw blood until you're dizzy. They take fluid from your spine. They measure your skull. They tattoo over your tattoo, as if your number was the only thing incorrect. Then they escalate. You're taken into another room. Brighter lights, less warmth, no windows. They inject something into your arm. You ask what it is. They don't respond. Your veins burn. You vomit, or faint, or scream, or all three. They write that down too. You wake up hours later, or days. There's no clock. The pain doesn't wake you. It waits with you. There's a girl next to you, maybe 11. Her head is shaved. Her arm is bandaged. She doesn't speak. Her lips are cracked. She trembles every time a door opens. You don't ask what happened. She wouldn't tell you. You hear rumours. Always rumours. One man was submerged in ice water to see how long he could survive. One woman was forced to drink salt water. Nothing else. For a week. They exposed children to disease. Cut them open while still alive. Compared organs. Photographed pain. They say they were trying to understand the limits of the human body. You know, they were just trying to forget it was human. Twins were especially valuable. You hear the name Mengele whispered like a curse. Some twins were injected with dye in their eyes. Others were stitched together. No anesthesia, no apology. If one twin died, the other was killed for comparison. You used to think medicine was sacred, that doctors were helpers, healers. Now you know better. Now you know science can rot just like anything else, especially when it stops asking why and only asks how far. You return to the barracks eventually, changed. Not physically, maybe, or not visibly, but something is missing. Something is looser in your soul. You don't talk about what happened. No one does. But they can see it. They make room for you in the bunk. Share their crust of bread. Pretend they don't notice the way your hands shake. The girl doesn't come back. No one says her name again. Later that night, you trace a Hebrew letter into the dirt with your finger. Shin, for Shoma, protector. You wonder if it ever meant anything. You fall asleep shivering, not from cold, but from knowing there are people who see your body as a canvas for cruelty, and that they call it progress. Children don't belong here. At least that's what they say. But children are everywhere. Tiny ghosts, barely visible in the sea of striped uniforms and guarded fences. You wake up one morning to find a group of children huddled in a corner of the barracks, whispering secrets no adult dares speak aloud. They speak of hiding places, of false names, of small escapes. One girl, no older than 7, carries a worn doll with one eye missing. She calls it her guardian. You watch her tuck the doll beneath her jacket as a guard passes. You wonder if the doll will protect her. You wonder if she even believes it. Some children are hidden by families. They are stuffed into cupboards, trunks, basements, clothed in rags too big or too small, fed scraps from borrowed meals. They learn to stay silent, to disappear, to be still like shadows. Others are orphaned, or abandoned, or too weak to hide. They roam the camp in small groups, eyes wide and cautious. You hear their laughter sometimes, sharp and brittle, like broken glass. It's the sound of trying to be children in a place that forbids it. One boy teaches himself to read using stolen scraps of paper. He writes letters to a father he's never met. You see a girl draw chalk outlines on the wall, imagining a playground. Another boy practices a magic trick, hiding coins in his palm. They hold on to these small acts like lifelines. Because survival isn't just about food or work, it's about hope, it's about remembering, it's about the stubborn refusal to vanish completely. You meet a mother who hides her newborn beneath a pile of blankets. She sings lullabies in a hushed voice. Her eyes tell you she's praying for miracles. Sometimes children vanish overnight. No one explains, no one asks. You learn to nod politely when someone mentions transport. You know it means fear. You don't ask for details. The children grow up faster here. They learn pain before they learn joy. They learn loss before they learn trust. You see them scavenge for scraps. You see them sneak to forbidden places. You see their bodies grow thin, but their eyes burn bright. One child steals an apple. He is caught. The punishment is public. You don't forget. You don't speak of it. Because silence is survival. And sometimes the greatest resistance is to live. To laugh. To cry. To hold a hand. To keep a name. Even when everything is trying to erase you. You carry their stories in your heart. Because one day they must be told. Because they are the shadows of a world that tried to forget them, but never could. You don't survive something like this alone. No one does. Not really. Some people help. Some people look away. Some people count your shoes before you've even stepped off the train. You see it clearly when the fences blur behind you, and the world outside the camp still carries on. Markets open, doors close, trains run on time. You remember the station master? He was there the day you were herded into the cattle car. You locked eyes with him as you stepped onto the platform. He looked tired, bored even. Then he looked away, not in shame, in routine. He didn't curse you, didn't spit, didn't help either. He just moved on. He did his job. That was the line, always. I was just doing my job. You meet people years later who say they had no idea. They lived just beyond the tracks, just past the smoke. We didn't know, they say. We couldn't see. We couldn't imagine. But the ash stuck to their laundry, and the silence stuck to everything else. There were others too. People who did know, who chose to know, who did something with it. In the Warsaw ghetto, you heard whispers of a pharmacist named Tadeusz. He wasn't Jewish. He ran the store on the corner, just inside the ghetto wall. He could have left, but he stayed, risked everything to smuggle food, hide messages, save lives. He didn't have to. No one ever has to. There was a woman, Irina, a social worker. She snuck children out of the ghetto in toolboxes, in sacks, beneath bricks in wheelbarrows. Hundreds of them. Babies with new names, false papers, Catholic prayers whispered through Jewish mouths. She wrote down every real name, every real birth date, every real parent, hid the list in jars, and buried them under an apple tree. So when it was over, if it was over, those children might find their way back. She was caught, tortured, survived. Some of the children did too. There was a farmer in Belgium who hid a boy in his barn for 2 years. Fed him, protected him, let him read by candlelight. The neighbours suspected, he denied it. He buried the evidence every morning before sunrise. No payment, no thanks. He died poor. And proud. You remember a man in striped uniform like yours? But he had access, a cleaner's pass, a shift near the kitchen. He passed you a crust of bread one day, said nothing, just slipped it into your hand like he was handing over a match in a dark cave. That bread lasted 2 meals. You never saw him again. Sometimes help looked like a nod, a warning, a glance at a list and a finger tapping a certain name with a barely there shake of the head. Sometimes help meant lying. For you, to you. There were families who took children into their homes, taught them new names, took down the family photos. "You're our cousin now," they'd say. "From the country, very shy." Some of those children made it. Some were found. When they were caught, the punishment was the same. No matter your beliefs, no matter your passport, death. Still, they did it anyway. And then there were the others, the ones who profited, who bought abandoned homes for pennies, who melted down gold teeth, who sold shoes, who processed the paperwork, ran the trains, signed the orders, poured the gasoline, carried the ledger books. Ordinary people doing ordinary things at extraordinary cost. There were guards who beat you in the morning and read poetry at night. Commanders who kissed their children good night and sent yours to the gas chambers. You remember a German officer who spoke to you once, told you calmly that it was nothing personal, just orders. You asked him if he believed in God. He smiled and walked away. The world around the camp didn't stop. Towns still bustled. Newspapers still printed. Weddings happened. Babies were born. Songs were written. Trees were trimmed for Christmas. Shops opened for Easter. The smoke didn't stop them. The fences didn't frighten them. The silence was good for business. And yet, some people helped, really helped, risked their names, their homes, their children, their lives. They didn't save everyone, but they saved someone. And that matters. Because in a world built to erase you, the person who says, "I see you," is no longer a bystander. They are a wall, a lantern, a name worth remembering. You hear it before you believe it, shouting, distant at first, not the usual orders, not German, not barking, not the rhythm of boots you've grown to fear. This is different, loud, chaotic, sharp, then a sound like metal tearing itself open, then silence, then the gates. They open. Not for roll call, not for transport, not for another selection, just open. You squint into the light and see the impossible. Soldiers. Not the ones who beat you, not the ones who counted you. These speak a different language, wear different uniforms. They look tired, eyes sunken, faces drawn, but human. More shocked than you are, maybe. It's April 1945. You don't know what month it is, or what year, but you know something has ended. The camp is being liberated. People cheer, cry, fall to their knees. But you don't. You just stare. Because you don't know how to react to something you stopped believing in. You're handed food, not a crust, not a spoonful, a real portion. You eat it too fast. Your body rebels. You vomit. You cry. Then you try again. The soldiers don't understand the crying, neither do you. They walk the barracks. They take photographs. They take notes. They speak to each other in urgent tones, horrified tones, but never loud enough for you to understand. They didn't know, some of them. They say it out loud. We didn't know. You believe them. Sort of. You're told you're free. The camp is closed. You can leave. But where? You've been here so long, you don't remember where home is, or if it still exists, or if you were even old enough to have one before the world collapsed. You look around and realise many of the others have nowhere to go either. Some walk away from the gates, into the woods, into the hills, just away. You stay, for now. The guards are gone, the towers are empty, the fences don't hum with electricity anymore, and still, you don't step too close. Freedom feels like a trick. Your number is still on your arm. You try to scrub it. You can't. You sleep in the same bunk that night. No one tells you not to. It's habit now. You lie on the wood. The smell of the camp hasn't changed. The air hasn't changed. You still feel watched, even though the eyes are gone. In the morning, the Americans come again, with food, with supplies, with orders. They try to organise. They mean well. They don't understand. They ask for your name. You forget it for a moment. You give your number by accident. They look away. You ask for your mother. They ask where she lived. You say here. They frown. They take your name. They write it down. A new list. A different kind of list. They give you papers. A card that says displaced person. That's what you are now. Not a prisoner. Not a Jew. Not a number. A displaced person. They say it like a label. Like it helps. You get a new bed. A real one. Clean sheets. A towel. You sit on it and shake. You don't sleep. You don't understand softness anymore. Someone hands you clothes. Civilian clothes. They're too big or too small. Doesn't matter. They smell like laundry, and that makes you cry. You don't know why. They set up temporary camps for survivors. DP camps, they call them. You think they might be better. Some are, some aren't. There are still fences, still guards, even if they're friendlier. Still waiting in lines, still roll calls. Not for punishment, for logistics. You begin to meet others. Strangers who look familiar. Because all the survivors wear the same haunted stare. They ask about towns you've heard of. People you might have known. Names you can't place anymore. You trade names like currency. Did you know her? Have you seen him? Was he in Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau? I heard someone from your village made it. I heard a cousin saw your brother. Sometimes it's true. Usually it isn't. You don't cry when they say your family is gone. You already knew. But hearing it out loud gives the grief permission. So you sit down and you let it in. And it almost breaks you. There are people who come to help. Relief workers, doctors, journalists. They take your photograph. Ask you to tell your story. You try. But the words sound wrong when spoken. So much of what happened feels unspeakable. You stop trying. You spend hours doing nothing. Sitting in a chair. Watching the sun move across a wall. Some people leave quickly. They have family in America, in Palestine, in Canada. They board boats. They carry suitcases. They hold visas like gold. You don't have one. You don't have anyone. You apply anyway. Months pass. You're treated for typhus, for dysentery, for malnutrition. Your body begins to change, but it doesn't feel like yours anymore. You speak less. You smile never. Someone gives you a notebook. You try to write. But what do you say? Dear God, I survived. Dear diary, today I didn't die. The pages stay blank. A rabbi arrives one day. He sets up a small service, says Kaddish for the dead. You stand in the back and mouth the words. You don't know who you're saying them for. Everyone. No one. Yourself. The Red Cross starts publishing lists. Survivors, towns, camps, names. You read them obsessively. Looking for your own. Looking for someone you lost. One day someone calls your name. Not your number. Not your camp name. Your real name. You flinch. Then nod. Then cry. It's your cousin. Alive. You embrace. The first touch that hasn't hurt in years. You tell each other the stories. Not all of them. Just enough to understand. You leave the camp together eventually. To where? Doesn't matter. Just not here. You try to live. That's what comes next. Not freedom, not peace, just the trying. You go to a city. Work in a shop. Sleep in a bed with sheets. Read a book. Burn the striped uniform. Fold a number tattoo into your sleeve. You eat slowly now. Still, after all this time, you keep a piece of bread in your pocket, just in case. You don't trust warm water, or doctors, or sudden noises, but you laugh once. And then again, it surprises you. You meet someone, another survivor. They speak your language, your silence, your past. You fall in love. Not like before. More like rebuilding. You get married in a small hall. No one from your childhood is there. You light a candle for them. You have a child. You don't name them after anyone. You give them a new name. A whole name. They ask you once when they're older, if it's true, what they heard. You say yes. But not everything. Not yet. They ask why you still sleep with your shoes near the bed. You don't answer. You just smile. Years later, you're asked to speak. At a school. About the camps. You almost say no. But you go. You stand at the front of a classroom and tell them what happened. You tell them about the gates, the smoke, the silence, the hunger. You tell them about the names, the ones remembered, the ones lost. You see them cry. You tell them not to. You just want them to know. To carry it forward. To remember. Because surviving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of carrying the story for everyone who didn't get to. That's what liberation meant. Not freedom, but responsibility. After the liberation, there was nowhere to go. That was the first realization. The second was that no one was coming to find you. People waited anyway. For a week. For a month. Some waited years. You left the camp in a transport truck provided by the Allies. You didn't ask where it was going. No one did. You just needed to be off the grounds. The camp had been turned into a temporary recovery station. There were supplies, even beds, but everything about it still smelled like sickness and death. The truck dropped you in a nearby town. It was the first time in years you had been in a town where people were not wearing uniforms and holding rifles. The people stared at you. Your head was shaved. You were wearing civilian clothes, but they didn't fit right. You looked like a ghost, and they looked at you like one. You went to the municipal office. You asked if they had records of survivors. The clerk didn't look up. She told you to check with the Red Cross office. You asked where it was. She said 2 streets over, near the old church. At the Red Cross, there were lists posted on the walls. Typed. Organised by city, sometimes by last name. You looked for your family, your parents, your sister, your cousins. You checked every spelling you could think of. You found nothing. There was a form to fill out. You added your name, your birth year, your hometown, and a list of names you were searching for. The woman behind the desk nodded, took the paper, and stapled it to a pile of others. You asked what happened next. She said if someone else comes looking for you, they'll match the names. You asked how long that takes. She said she didn't know. You left without asking anything else. You knew the answer already. You went to the train station. You hadn't been on a train since the one that brought you to the camp. You stepped onto the platform slowly. You kept expecting someone to grab you, yell at you, push you forward. No one did. You bought a ticket. You still had a piece of paper that identified you as a displaced person. It let you travel without money. The train took you back to the region where you were born. You arrived at your old village in the early afternoon. It looked the same from a distance. Same trees, same roads, but it wasn't the same. You walked the streets. You looked at the houses. Yours was still there. Same roof, same front door, but the paint had changed. Someone else lived in it now. You knocked on the door. A woman answered. She didn't recognise you. You told her your last name. She looked behind her, called to someone. A man stepped forward. He remembered. He said, "You're the youngest one, aren't you?" You nodded. He said, "I thought you were dead." You asked about your parents. He shook his head. "They were taken, same day as the Goldsteins." You asked where. He shrugged. "Nobody ever came back." You stood there. He said he was sorry. He said they didn't know what was going to happen. You looked behind him, inside your house. It had furniture that wasn't yours, curtains that weren't your mother's. The floor had been waxed. The hallway was shorter than you remembered. You asked if you could look around. He hesitated, then he opened the door. You walked through the rooms. You didn't touch anything. You saw where the mezuzah had been. Just an outline now. You asked if he still had the photograph that was on the mantel, the one of your sister holding your grandfather's hand. He said no. You left without asking for anything more. You went to the synagogue. It had been turned into a storage building. There were crates stacked to the ceiling. You walked around to the side entrance. The Hebrew letters on the stone arch were still visible but faded. You reached out and ran your hand over them. They felt like rough paper. You tried to find someone from your school. You visited the building, but it had been turned into an office. A clerk told you the records were lost during the occupation. You asked if any of the teachers had returned. She didn't know. You stayed in the village for 2 nights. You slept on a bench in the train station. No one offered a place to stay. No one asked what you needed. You didn't ask either. On the 3rd day you left. You didn't say goodbye to anyone. You went to another city, larger. You found a building with a sign that read, Jewish Relief Committee. You walked in. The man behind the desk asked if you had a place to stay. You said no. He told you about a boarding house that was taking in survivors. He gave you an address and a note to give the woman who ran it. The boarding house was on a side street. The hallway smelled of old wood and boiled potatoes. The room they gave you was small. 1 bed, 1 chair, a cracked mirror above a sink. The sheets were clean. That was enough. You met others like you. They all had numbers on their arms. Some talked, some didn't. You shared what little you had. You traded names of camps, of towns, of relatives. Every conversation ended with a question. Did you know them? Almost always the answer was no. You looked for work. No one was hiring survivors. You were told to wait. You swept floors. You carried boxes. You worked for food, not wages. Some people came to the boarding house with pamphlets. From America. From Canada. From Palestine. They said there were ships. Resettlement programs. Opportunities. You took the forms and filled them out. Months passed. You were called to the consulate. They asked questions. They looked at your papers. They took a photograph. They told you to wait. You moved to a camp outside the city. Temporary housing for people with no documents. It was better than the camp before. There were beds, heaters, windows. You began to eat normally again. Not much, but you no longer counted each bite. You stopped hiding food under the mattress. You got news one day. Someone from your old town was alive. A neighbour. You met him. He told you your older cousin had survived. She was in Prague, working with a relief agency. You wrote to her. Weeks later, a letter came. She remembered you. She thought you were dead. You wrote again. She wrote back. She said she was trying to get out too. You applied for a visa to Canada. It took 9 months. You had interviews, medical checks, more paperwork. One day they told you it had been approved. You left Europe in October 1946. The boat was crowded. People carried boxes, sat on suitcases, clutched papers as if they might vanish. You stayed on deck most of the time. You didn't like the dark below. Too many memories. You arrived in Halifax, then took a train to Toronto. A local synagogue had sponsored your passage. A family took you in. They had a spare room. They gave you food, clothes, and a job in their store. You worked every day. You said yes to everything. You said thank you too often. You saved your money. You rented a room of your own. You met others who had made it. Some from your village, some from other camps. You spoke to them in Yiddish, or broken German, or sometimes just with your eyes. You built a life. You found a job in a factory, you learned English, you took night classes, you moved into a small apartment. Years later you married. Your spouse was also a survivor. You didn't talk much about what happened. You both knew that was enough. You had children. Gave them names that didn't belong to the dead. You taught them how to laugh, how to feel safe. You didn't teach them everything. You couldn't. You went back to Europe once, to visit. You walked past your old house. It looked smaller. You visited the camp. The barbed wire was gone. There was a plaque. You didn't read it. You lit a candle. Then you left. You didn't talk about it for a long time. Most survivors didn't. After the war, the priority was rebuilding. Getting food. Getting housing. Getting visas. Figuring out which country would let you in. Getting married. Finding work. Starting over. There wasn't much room for memory. There wasn't much audience for it either. In the early years, people didn't want to hear the details. They wanted the headlines. You were in a camp? Incredible. That was enough for them. You didn't offer more. They didn't ask. You remembered anyway. Some of it was constant. A number on your arm. The sound of gravel under boots. The way your body still froze at the sound of a train whistle. Some of it came and went. Smells. Phrases. The way bread tore in your hand. The way some people spoke to waiters. Little things. You didn't forget. You couldn't. You just didn't say it out loud. Then, years later, things started changing. Slowly. A museum opened in Israel. Yad Vashem. You heard about it in the newspaper. You looked at the pictures. Rows of shelves. Names etched into stone. A map of the camps. A room just for children. Photographs pinned to black walls. Faces. Whole families. Lost. You cried for a long time after reading the article. Not because it made you sad, that had never stopped, but because someone had built a place just to remember. You weren't used to that. Later there was one in Washington. You visited. You didn't want to, but someone invited you. A friend, another survivor. You entered quietly, didn't speak. You walked through the exhibits, saw the uniforms, the ration cards, the wooden bunks. A real train car, the kind you were once locked in. You touched it, lightly, just to see if it felt the same. It did. There were letters written by children, photographs, audio recordings. You stood in front of a wall filled with shoes. Real ones. Thousands of them. You found one that looked like yours. The one you lost. You stared at it for 20 minutes. You left the museum without speaking. At home, you sat in the kitchen for a long time, just sitting. The next day you went back. You brought your daughter. You didn't tell her everything. You just said, "I want you to see this." She didn't ask questions at first. She just walked beside you, read the captions, touched your hand when the elevator door opened into the exhibit. She didn't let go for the rest of the visit. At the end, she asked if any of your shoes had survived. You said no. She asked if you knew any of the people in the photographs. You said probably. She asked if you wanted to go again. You said yes, that was the beginning. More memorials opened. One in Berlin, one in Paris, dozens in small towns. Some built by survivors, some by governments, some by children of the murdered. They came in all forms: plazas, sculptures, glass panels, underground rooms, names carved into walls, digital archives, brass plaques embedded into sidewalks. You visited many of them. You took pictures, though you rarely looked at them afterward. Some places had books of names. You looked through them, slowly. Sometimes you found someone you recognized. You took a photo of that page. You didn't know why. Sometimes you didn't find the names you were looking for. That didn't make it better. Some memorials were enormous, built from concrete and steel, like fortresses, designed to make you feel the weight. Others were tiny. You remembered one in Austria, just a small metal plate in the ground, outside a bakery. It listed the names of the Jewish family who once lived upstairs, the dates they were deported, the name of the camp. No ceremony, just there, where people walked every day. You stood next to it for a while. A boy on a bicycle passed over it without noticing. That was the point. The people who designed these memorials didn't want them hidden. They wanted them stepped on, lived with, integrated. Because memory shouldn't always feel like a museum. Sometimes it should feel like a sidewalk. And you started speaking at schools. Not every year, not every month. Just when you felt strong enough. The first time you brought only a few notes. You didn't need them. You remembered every detail. You stood in front of 30 teenagers who had never heard a survivor speak in person. They were quiet. You told them how it started, with names on a list, with neighbours disappearing, with signs in shop windows, with curfews, with paperwork, with people looking the other way. You didn't start with the camp. You started with the world that let the camp happen. They asked good questions. Some asked if you forgave the people who did it. You said no. Some asked if it could happen again. You said yes. You brought photographs. Some students cried. You told them crying was okay, but remembering was more important. You did more events after that. Sometimes with your children, sometimes with your grandchildren. You visited Poland with a group, mostly teenagers. You went back to the camp. This time it was part of a tour. They had headphones, tour guides, signs posted near the barracks. You didn't wear headphones. You didn't need signs. You walked to the barrack where you once slept. You pointed at the exact bunk. No one touched it. You didn't ask them to. They just knew. That night, you spoke to the group in the hotel. You didn't tell them about liberation. You told them about the day your sister was taken. About the sound she made when the guards pulled her away. No one said anything for 5 minutes. Later, A girl approached you and asked if your sister had survived. You said you didn't know. She gave you a piece of paper with her email and said, "If you ever find out, can you tell me?" You still have that paper. It's folded in your wallet. Every few years, you're invited to another dedication. A new sculpture, a new garden, a new hall of remembrance. You attend when you can. You wear a black suit, a pin with a small flame. You shake hands with politicians, with ambassadors, with other survivors. You take a seat. You listen to the speeches. You nod politely. You understand that they mean well, but you also know something they don't. You remember what it felt like to be unwanted, illegal, numbered. You remember what it felt like to have people stare at you in the street, not because of respect, but because they were trying to decide if you were still human. So you smile when they say, "Never again." But part of you is always watching the world, just in case. You help fund a memorial in your hometown. You donate a photograph, the one of your mother holding your hand near the synagogue. It's the only copy. You don't tell anyone how long you stared at it before letting it go. Now it's under glass. People walk past it every day. Sometimes they stop. You hope they stop. You speak less now. You don't need to say everything anymore. The names are on the plaques. The dates are in the books. The testimony is recorded. The memory is built into stone. But the grief, that's yours. And it doesn't live in architecture. It lives in your morning coffee. In the scarf you still wear, even when it's warm. In the fact that you always sit with your back to the wall. It lives in the pause between your heartbeat and the moment the lights go out. You don't light candles just once a year. You light them whenever you feel the silence creeping in. You still visit the memorials. You still say the names, because that's how the dead stay with us. Not as ghosts, but as facts, names, dates, objects, rooms, shoes, numbers, and sometimes even as memories carved into the floor where you once stood and waited to be counted. It didn't end when the camps were emptied. The barbed wire came down. The uniforms were abandoned. The guards disappeared or blended back into cities where they had always lived. But the warning didn't end. You noticed it when you first tried to explain what happened, and someone responded with doubt. Not denial, just doubt. The kind that tilted its head and said, "Really? That many people? It just seems hard to believe." You noticed it when politicians started saying the camps were a tragedy, but a necessary lesson in strength. You noticed it when people said the war was complicated, as if that explained anything. You noticed it in the way history books skipped pages. How they gave space to battles and generals, but only one paragraph to gas chambers. You noticed when classrooms got quiet during those chapters, how teachers moved on quickly. That was the first echo. The first sign that silence wasn't an accident. That forgetting was easier than remembering. You remembered. And you saw the signs when they came again. Not in uniforms this time. Not in German. Not with flags, but with language. Words like vermin, criminals, infiltrators. You heard them on radios, in newspapers, shouted from podiums, about refugees, about immigrants, about entire groups of people reduced to one word. You heard people say, "They don't belong here." You remembered what came after that sentence. You watched countries close their borders. You saw boats turned away. People denied asylum. You saw the same arguments used again. Not by the same people, not in the same language, but with the same outcome. People left behind. People punished for existing. You remembered being one of them. You saw marches in cities you once believed were safe. Flags with symbols too close to the ones you buried in memory. Torches. Chants. Proud faces. You heard crowds laugh when someone made a joke about ovens. You sat in your chair and didn't move. You waited for someone else to say something. Sometimes no one did. You got letters from other survivors. They saw it too. They called it familiar. You remembered what familiar can become. You kept watching. You saw history revised. People say the numbers were exaggerated, that it wasn't as bad, that there were two sides, that not all guards were cruel, that some prisoners deserved it. You heard teenagers say they never learned about the Holocaust in school. You went to a bookstore, picked up a new textbook. You flipped through it. There were 3 pages, 2 photographs, 1 caption. You closed the book. You gave a talk at a school soon after. You looked out at a room full of children who had never seen your tattoo before. Some stared. Some didn't know what it was. One asked if it hurt. You said yes. You said it still does. You told them how it started, not in camps, but in newspapers, in laws, in elections, in jokes. You said it didn't begin with fire. It began with apathy. You watched the teacher in the back of the room nod slowly. Afterward, a student came up and said, "I didn't know this happened to real people." You said, "Now you do." You watched documentaries. You read reports. You saw a new term, post-truth. You saw people say that facts don't matter, that feelings were more important, that truth was subjective. You wondered if they'd ever stood on a train platform at 4 a.m. trying to hold a crying sibling while someone pointed a gun at their head and told them to move left. You wondered what their feelings would say about that. You kept track. You noticed when people shared conspiracy theories. You noticed when anti-Semitism came back into fashion, not always with swastikas, but with cartoons, with slurs, with memes. You saw Jewish cemeteries defaced. You saw synagogues shot up. You saw slogans spray-painted on walls, the kind your grandfather saw in 1933. You told your children. You told them not to be afraid, but to be aware. You taught them to speak up when others don't. You taught them the difference between being silent and being safe. You told them that safety is never permanent. You still go to services. Not every week, but enough. You sit near the back. You watch the exits. You scan the crowd. You think about escape routes. You wonder if anyone else does too. You watch security at the door. Volunteers in plain clothes with earpieces. You remember when synagogues didn't need that. You remember when yours was burned down. You told your rabbi once that the security made you feel strange. He said it made him feel necessary. You nodded. You still light candles. You still speak in schools. You still write letters when a public figure says something dangerous. You sign petitions. You show up. You stay awake longer than you used to. Not from fear, from awareness. The warning echoes when you hear a neighbour say, they should go back to their own country. When a pundit says, these people don't share our values. When someone online writes, we need to protect our bloodline. You've heard those phrases before. They don't change much. They just learn to say them with a smile now. You went to a protest once, against a travel ban, against a detention centre, against another law that punished someone for where they were born. You carried a sign that said, never again. Someone asked, never what? You wanted to say, never dehumanise, never isolate, never round people up, never forget what came next. But you just said, never this. That was enough. You met a young man that day. He was holding a photo of his grandparents. They were survivors too, from Hungary. He asked what camp you were in. You told him. He looked down. I learned about that in college, he said. You said I learned about it at 13. He didn't know what to say. That's fine. You gave him your number, the one on your arm. He stared at it like it was a map. Maybe it is. You still watch the news every night. You still read the names when there's a shooting, when there's a bombing, when someone writes a manifesto filled with all the old lies. You recognise the code words. You recognise the silence too. You still tell your story. You still correct people when they call it just a war thing. You tell them about the years before, the laws, the night raids, the lies. The camps didn't begin with gas. They began with words. You've seen how fast they spread now. Faster than before. Instant. Global. You wonder what would have happened if people had listened earlier. You wonder what could happen if they do now. You live in a city where you're allowed to pray, to vote, to walk the streets wearing whatever you want. You don't take it for granted. You check the locks at night. You check your neighbour's expressions. You watch who gets elected. You keep a packed bag in the closet. Not because you think you'll need it, but because once you did. You know it's possible. That's why you talk. That's why you stay awake when others fall asleep. Not because you're paranoid, but because you remember what the world looks like when it stops paying attention. And because you promised. You promised the names on the wall. You promised the cousin who didn't come back. You promised the girl with the doll. You promised the others in line that if you survived, you would remember and warn. You didn't realise it was happening at first. It didn't happen all at once. Not in one sweeping moment. It was gradual, quiet, administrative. At first, it just looked like people moving, leaving town, taking trips, disappearing into bureaucracy. It started with one house. You noticed the windows were shuttered. No one came out in the morning. No noise from the backyard. You thought maybe they had left early for the weekend, but they didn't return. 2 days later, a truck pulled into the driveway. Men carried furniture out, loaded it into the back, took the rugs, the dishes, the piano. You asked the neighbour what happened. She said they were relocated. You asked where. She didn't know, or said she didn't. You believed her, at the time. Then it happened again. Another family, then 2 more. One day you went to synagogue, and 3 families were missing from the usual row. No one knew why, or pretended not to. You started hearing new words. Resettlement, deportation, evacuation, security concerns. They were always said by men in uniforms, men who carried papers and notebooks and lists. The lists grew longer. You saw them at the town hall. You saw clerks checking names, ticking boxes. You asked your father if we were on one. He told you not to worry. You worried anyway. You stopped seeing your friends. One by one, you stopped asking why. Sometimes the answer came later, whispered behind closed doors. They were taken at dawn. They were on the transport last Friday. They didn't even have time to pack. There were rumours of camps, not prison camps, labour camps, work details. People were going to help the war effort, to build roads, to dig ditches. No one came back to say what it was really like. So the rumours continued. You tried to go about your day. You still went to school. You still walked the same path. But everything felt empty. The hallways echoed. Desks sat unused. Books stayed unopened. Teachers stopped asking questions. They just read from the front and waited for the bell. You remember the moment you realised how far it had gone. It was spring. You passed the bakery on your way home. It was closed. There was a sign in the window. For sale by the state. It had belonged to the Rosenzweigs for 20 years. You had eaten there every Friday since you could remember. You knew their daughter. She used to sit next to you in math. They didn't leave a note. They didn't say goodbye. They just vanished. That night, you asked your parents again what was happening. Your mother said it would pass. Your father didn't say anything. The next week, you noticed the rabbi was gone, then the tailor, then the grocer. You went to school again. Half the class was missing. No one gave a reason. You saw a moving truck outside the apartment building across from yours. Men carried boxes down the stairs. Someone said it was the government taking inventory for redistribution. You wondered who got to decide what happened to someone's wedding china or their family photographs. You stopped asking questions. The mail stopped arriving. Then your cousins disappeared. One day they were eating lunch in your kitchen. 2 days later, the door to their flat was locked and no one answered when you knocked. You asked a neighbour. He shrugged. They got sent somewhere, he said. That was all. You stopped knocking. You began to pack a small bag, just in case. You hid it under your bed. Inside, a sweater, a toothbrush, a photograph, and the silver comb your grandmother gave you. You didn't know what you were preparing for. You just knew something was coming. And then your name was called. You were at school. A man came in with a clipboard, said your name, told you to gather your things. He didn't shout, he didn't smile, he just waited. You walked home under escort. Your mother was already packing. Your father stood by the window. You asked where you were going. They said a transport was scheduled, that's all. The next morning, you were herded into a square with dozens of others. Some from your building, some from other streets. You didn't recognise all the faces. There were guards, guns, barked orders, lines. You waited in the sun. Then the rain. Someone collapsed. No one helped. Eventually a truck arrived. Then another. They loaded you inside. No seats. Just metal walls. You stood, pressed shoulder to shoulder. You drove for hours. Or maybe it was just one. You lost track. You arrived at a holding site, a warehouse. You were kept there for 3 days. No explanation. No clocks. No way to bathe. You slept on straw. Ate once a day. Drank from a spigot in the wall. Then another transport came. A train. Cattle cars. Wooden. No windows. You were loaded inside with 70 others. The doors shut. It was dark. No food. No water. No space to sit. You rode like that for 2 days. People cried, screamed, prayed, went silent. When the doors opened again, you were somewhere else. A camp. Guards. Dogs. Barbed wire. You were told to line up. You were sorted. You were numbered. You were assigned a bunk. Everything that had been yours, clothes, name, hair, dignity, was taken. You weren't alone. Thousands had arrived before you. Tens of thousands after. The people who disappeared from your town. Some were here. Some weren't. You found one of your classmates. She looked older, thin, tired. She didn't speak much. You asked about her family. She said they didn't make it past selection. You stopped asking after that. In the following months, more trains arrived. You watched the lines, the sorting, the vanishings. You saw people you knew only for seconds before they were taken away again. To the gas, to the pits, to the medical blocks. Each day someone else was missing from your barrack. Sometimes they died. Sometimes they were moved. Sometimes they were simply gone. You began to keep track, but the numbers didn't make sense. There was no logic, no pattern, only absence. Every day, the world around you got smaller. Every day, another familiar face went missing. Entire villages disappeared. You heard stories from other prisoners about towns emptied in a single night, buses, lists, marches into forests, then nothing. One woman said her entire synagogue, 200 people, was executed beside a ravine. She watched from under the floorboards of a neighbour's house. She never saw them again. The man in the next bunk lost 3 daughters in one day. He found their shoes on the sorting platform. He still kept a ribbon from one of them in his pocket. You stopped thinking about survival. You started thinking about memory. You repeated names to yourself, the names of the people who vanished. You whispered them at night, not in prayer, just so they wouldn't be lost. You told them to others. You listened when someone else remembered one. You promised that when you left, if you left, you'd say them again, because no one else would. And most of the world was already forgetting. The idea of laughter in a concentration camp doesn't make sense at first. How could anyone laugh in a place designed to kill you? But it happened. Not often, not loudly, not for long. But it happened. It wasn't laughter like you'd find at a theatre or in a living room. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't carefree. It was sharper. Drier. A kind of defence mechanism. When everything else was gone, food, safety, privacy, humour was one of the few things people could still create. It was a way to hold on to something human. You first noticed it during roll call. You were standing in line as always, cold, tired, hungry. The guard mispronounced someone's name, said it wrong twice. The man behind you muttered under his breath, "Maybe next time he'll forget mine altogether." It wasn't funny, not really, but it made you smile. You didn't laugh, not out loud. That was dangerous. But the man saw your expression. He grinned. Just for a second. You remembered that moment for days. It didn't change anything. It didn't improve your chances. But it made something unbearable a little less heavy. Later, you started hearing more of these remarks. "You think this soup has flavour? You must have found a potato. Only 2 lice today? What a luxury. I hear the Germans are losing. Maybe next they'll build us a spa." None of these lines were delivered for applause. They were quiet, sarcastic, aimed at no one and everyone, and they worked because everyone understood the absurdity already. You didn't have to explain the joke. You were the joke. The situation was the punchline. In the barracks, people would exaggerate. A man who got slapped by a guard would later say, "You should have seen the other guy." Another who got caught stealing a carrot would say, "I was just inspecting it for poison." It wasn't about being clever. It was about feeling like a person, even briefly. Humour made you the speaker again, instead of the object. Some prisoners were known for it. One man in your bunk used to mimic the guards. Not their language, just the tone, the stiffness, the posture. He did it so well you almost forgot where you were. He never did it outside, just among you, just in the shadows. But people leaned in when he started, even those who hadn't spoken all day. He once said, "If I survive this, I'm charging admission." You all believed he would. He didn't. But people told his stories anyway. There was another prisoner who made up songs, rhyming couplets about lice, about soup, about the ridiculousness of the morning count. His songs weren't beautiful, but they made people laugh. He used camp slang, Yiddish idioms, and German curses all in one line. He said it kept him sane. He was right. You remember the woman who would tell fairy tales? Not real ones. made up stories with characters from the camp. She'd describe a broomstick that could sweep its own corner of the barracks, or a pair of boots that made the guards slip in mud, or a rooster who could yell "Halt!" better than the SS. The children listened. So did the adults. You waited for those stories like you once waited for Sunday lunch. It reminded you that imagination hadn't been taken from you. Sometimes the humour was darker. You heard a man say, "When this is over, I'm never standing in a line again. I don't care if it's for heaven." Or, you know it's serious when even the lice are applying for transfers. One day a guard asked a prisoner if he wanted to work in the kitchen or be shot. The prisoner said, "Depends on the soup." The guard laughed. The prisoner lived, not because of the joke, but maybe because in that moment the guard saw him differently. There were stories that weren't funny to anyone outside the camp. One prisoner told a joke every night before bed. Same one. It wasn't even a good joke, but people waited for it. Because it was a ritual. Because it was his. Because every night he told it was a night he hadn't died. The night he didn't tell it, everyone noticed. He'd been moved to the infirmary. He didn't come back. The next night, someone else told his joke, not out of disrespect, out of memory. You weren't supposed to remember the joke. You were supposed to remember the man. That's how humour worked there. It wasn't to forget. It was to hold on. To mark the moment. To draw a line around pain and say, "I see you. But you're not everything." Even in the darkest places, people found something to laugh at. It wasn't because they were delusional. It was because they were resilient. Some prisoners even drew cartoons. On scraps of paper. With charcoal. With stolen pencil tips. They weren't detailed, but they showed camp life. A skeleton reading a menu. A guard slipping on a banana peel. A prisoner dreaming of roast beef and waking up to watery turnips. They weren't displayed. They were hidden, passed from hand to hand, destroyed after one viewing. But they mattered. They were evidence that creativity hadn't died. There were moments when humour saved someone's life. A well-timed reply. A ridiculous excuse. A sudden impersonation. A guard who didn't laugh, but didn't shoot either. You heard about a boy who pretended to be the camp commandant's nephew for an entire afternoon. Just walked into the officer's mess, asked for tea, criticised the decor. He was caught. But the commandant thought it was funny. He let the boy live. Just once. That boy later escaped. Not because of humour, but maybe it helped keep him human long enough. When liberation came, some survivors told their stories with humour first. Not to minimise, but to cope, to explain, to give the audience something to hold on to before the full weight dropped. You did it too. You told people how the latrines were frozen solid in winter and how you once mistook a block of ice for a pillow. They laughed. Then you told them about the deaths. The laughter stopped, but it had helped them listen. That's what humour did. It didn't change the facts. It changed the entry point. It opened a crack in the wall. You don't joke about the gas chambers, or the selections, or the crematoria. But you still smile when you remember the man who said, "If we get through this, I'm charging rent for my bunk." Or the girl who taught a rat to fetch crumbs and called it her dog. Or the old man who gave nicknames to the guards. One eyebrow, no neck, Captain Stinky. He whispered them like secrets. Made you smile when you passed them. That wasn't disrespect. That was survival. After the war, some survivors became comedians. They stood on stages, told stories, used timing and irony to describe the indescribable. Audiences laughed, then asked if it was all true. It was. That's what made it funny. And unbearable. You still tell stories. Sometimes you use humour. Sometimes you don't. But you remember how it helped you hold on. How it reminded you that you were still capable of more than pain. You pass it down. You tell your grandchildren about the man who snored so loud the guards came to shut him up. Or the time someone painted a moustache on a propaganda poster. Or the prisoner who said, "You think this is bad? Wait until we have to pay rent." They laugh. Then they ask the real questions. That's how the memory stays alive. That's how the humanity survives. Even in hell, someone told a joke. Even there, someone smiled. You didn't stop believing overnight. It happened gradually. Or maybe it didn't happen at all. Maybe belief just changed shape. Before the war, religion was part of daily life. It wasn't separate. It was in the way your mother lit candles on Friday night, in the way your father bowed his head before meals, in the way people walked to synagogue in polished shoes even when it snowed. You went to school during the week and cheddar on Sundays. You recited Hebrew, even if you didn't understand every word. You knew when the holidays were. You knew the prayers by sound, if not always by meaning. Religion was normal, expected. Then things changed. First, you weren't allowed in public schools anymore. Then, Jewish schools were shut down. Synagogues closed. The one in your town was vandalised. They broke the windows, ripped the prayer books, left pig's blood on the ark. Some families stopped going, not because they stopped believing, but because they didn't want to be targets. Yarmulkes came off. Hebrew was spoken less. Torah scrolls were hidden. Then it got worse. Shabbat candles were banned. Possessing a prayer book could get you arrested. Circumcision was called cultural defiance. Religious leaders were watched. Some were taken away. You saw your rabbi for the last time in late 1941. He looked older, thinner. He told your father to keep the mezuzah inside a drawer, not on the doorframe. "It's not worth dying for wood and parchment," he said. But your father didn't remove it. When they came for him, it was still there. You were deported months later. The camps weren't just designed to kill bodies. They were designed to erase identity. Religion was part of that. You arrived without a prayer book, without candles, without a tallit. But you remembered. You remembered the words, the melodies, the rhythms. That's what survived. You learned to pray with your eyes open, with no sound, just lips moving, just breath. Some still said blessings over food, even if it was spoiled. Even if it was soup made from rotting cabbage and brown water. They'd whisper, "Baruch atah Adonai," "Blessed are you, Lord," before drinking from a tin cup. Some fasted on Yom Kippur, not because it was required, but because they needed to feel the difference. When you're always hungry, it's hard to feel the meaning of fasting. But some still did it. A man in your barrack once gave you half his bread on Yom Kippur. He said, "I won't be eating anyway." He died 3 days later. You never forgot his name. There were secret minyans, groups of 10 men, who tried to gather and pray. Quietly, quickly, always watching the door. One guard finding you could mean death for everyone. But they did it anyway, not every day, but enough. There was a man in your block who had memorized most of the Torah. He used to whisper Parsha summaries on Fridays. He'd tell the stories as if they were happening outside the fence. Abraham walking with Isaac, Moses speaking to Pharaoh, David hiding in the cave. He once said, "We've always lived under tyrants. That's what the stories were for. Passover was impossible. There was no matzah, no wine, no lamb. But still, someone recited the 4 questions. Not all of them. Just enough to say, this night is different. Someone else answered, because we're still here. You once saw a man light 2 matchsticks in the corner of the barrack. He cupped his hands around them like they were candles. He closed his eyes. He whispered a blessing. That was Shabbat. You remember the woman who hummed a lullaby that used to be sung at the end of Havdalah? No flame, no spices, just the tune. You wept when you heard it, not because it was beautiful, but because it was familiar. You remembered your mother's voice, you remembered home. You didn't always believe, not in the way you did before. You stopped expecting God to intervene. You stopped expecting reward or punishment. You stopped asking why, but you never stopped reciting Shema before sleep. Even when you thought you wouldn't wake up, even when the bodies around you were cold, even when there was no pillow, no blanket, no light, you still said it. Some prisoners found strength in belief, others abandoned it completely. No one judged either choice. Faith was not a competition. It was a coping mechanism. You met a man who claimed he had argued with God every night since his wife was taken. I yell at him, he said, and if he doesn't like it, he can strike me down. He was still alive when the camp was liberated. You met another who said God had died in the camp. He never prayed again. You understood both of them. There were debates, even in the camp, not loud ones. Just quiet exchanges during work, while shoveling snow, while cleaning the barracks. Why would God allow this? Maybe we're being tested. Maybe there is no God. Maybe he's crying too. There were no answers, but the questions mattered. Asking them made you feel human. You held on to small rituals. Washing your hands with snow in the morning. Saying Modeh Ani in your head. Tapping your fingers to count the Omer during the weeks after Passover. One man tried to build a makeshift menorah for Hanukkah. He used bits of wire, burned a thread dipped in soup grease. It lasted 1 night. That was enough. It wasn't about light, it was about defiance. You weren't allowed to live, let alone worship. So every prayer was rebellion. Every whispered blessing was a protest. After liberation, religion came back slowly. Not because it was easy, but because it was still there. You found a synagogue in the DP camp. Small, makeshift. A curtain as an ark. A crate as a podium. You'd pray there for the first time in months. The room smelled of bleach and boiled potatoes, but it felt like home. You wept during Kaddish. You didn't name names. There were too many. Later, you had your bar mitzvah. At 19, with a borrowed talit, with no parents to witness it. Just strangers. Survivors. They cheered anyway. They said Mazal Tov. You said Amen. Years later you had children, and you taught them the same prayers, the same songs. You watched them light Shabbat candles in a kitchen filled with food. You remembered the matchsticks. You watched them drink grape juice and sing Dayenu. You remembered the empty bowls. You sat in a pew next to your grandson and watched him chant his Torah portion. You remembered the man who recited it from memory in the barracks. You stood by his grave after the service. You said Kaddish again, this time with family, with freedom, with shoes that fit, with no guards. You didn't know what God was anymore. You weren't sure you believed in miracles, but you believed in memory, and that was enough. In the camps, food was not nutrition, it was survival, it was control, it was humiliation, and it was never enough. You started each day hungry. You ended each day hungry. Hunger wasn't a feeling anymore. It was your entire existence. You were given a small portion of bread in the morning. It was usually stale, sometimes mouldy. You ate it anyway. You learned to eat slowly. You learned to make it last. You'd tear it into pieces and hide some for later. Then eat it anyway 10 minutes later, because the idea of saving food lost to the ache in your stomach. There was soup once a day. Soup was a generous word. It was hot water, sometimes with cabbage, other times with a trace of potato skin, very rarely a bean or a grain of barley. You learned to drink it fast before someone else tried to take it. You saw people fight over soup. You saw people steal crusts from the dead. You saw a man beaten to death because he reached for a second bowl. You stopped being disgusted. You stopped hesitating. There was no morality when you hadn't eaten in days. You saw people eat grass. Saw a man chew leather from a boot. Saw another man eat coal. Just to feel like something was in his stomach. But what consumed you more than the actual hunger was the thinking about food. That's what people don't understand. It wasn't just the physical emptiness. It was the obsession. You thought about food constantly. What you'd eaten before the war. What meals you missed. What your mother used to make. What your grandmother baked on holidays. Everyone did it. People recited recipes. Not because they had food, but because memory was the only menu they had left. You'd hear someone whisper, "First you boil the potatoes, then you mash them with a little garlic, not too much. Then add butter, the real kind, thick and yellow from the market on Vasily Street." Others would talk about roast chicken, not just the taste, but the smell, the skin crisping in the oven, the fat dripping onto the pan, the way it made the entire apartment warm. You'd lie on a wooden bunk and imagine soup, real soup, with chunks of meat, thick noodles, parsley on top. You'd imagine a bowl so hot it burned your lips, a spoon heavy with broth. You dreamed of bread that wasn't stale, thick slices of rye, crusty outside, soft inside, with butter, not margarine, butter. The kind you had to slice with a knife because it came in blocks. You dreamed of oranges, just one. Juicy, tart, sweet. You could feel it in your mouth, even though you hadn't seen one in years. You remembered the pastries from the bakery near your school. Your friend used to buy one every Friday. A square of dough with cherry filling. You could smell it even now, years later, inside a freezing barrack surrounded by dying men. It was torture and comfort at the same time. You learned to talk about food instead of pain. It gave people something to focus on, something to hold in their heads. You remember one man who described a 10-course wedding meal in perfect order. Every dish, every garnish, every smell. He recited it like a prayer. First course, chopped liver with onions. Not burned, just brown. Served cold. Then herring, both kinds, with dark bread and butter. People sat around him and nodded. They closed their eyes. Not to sleep, but to see it. You imagined the food so clearly, your mouth would water. You'd feel pangs as if you'd actually eaten. But then the soup cart came, and you remembered you hadn't. The fantasies never stopped. They just evolved. Some people created entire restaurants in their minds. Others remembered meals with their families in exact detail. You once spent 3 hours listing every dish your grandmother ever cooked, down to the spices she used, down to the plate she served them on. Someone else added their own grandmother's recipes, then another. Soon there were 6 of you lying in a bunk, whispering recipes in the dark. One man used to describe his mother's gefilte fish every night before bed. He didn't just describe it. He told stories around it. She only made it once a year. She'd grind the fish by hand. None of that store-bought stuff. There was always a fight about who got the biggest piece. She put too much pepper, but we never told her. It became a ritual. He died in the winter. No one said anything the next night. But someone else described borscht instead. Not as good, not the same, but it helped. People remembered restaurants too. Not expensive ones, just neighbourhood places. The bakery with the poppy seed rolls. The cafe with the bitter coffee and hard chairs. The stall in the market where you could get fried onions on everything. One man claimed he had eaten in Paris before the war. Described a steak so tender he didn't need a knife. No one believed him. It didn't matter. The memory was what counted. After liberation, the obsession didn't stop. You were taken to a recovery centre. The first meal you were given was bread and tea. You cried. Not because it was generous. Because it was real. Because it didn't come with a slap or a number. Because it wasn't stolen from someone else. You ate too fast. Most people did. Some got sick. Some died. Their bodies couldn't handle food anymore. You didn't care. You kept eating. You thought about all the food you had dreamed of. But the real thing didn't taste the same. It wasn't just about flavour. It was about context. About what had been lost. You went to a market in your first week outside the camp. Just to look. You stared at apples for 20 minutes. You picked one up. Held it to your face. It was cold. Heavy. You didn't buy it. You couldn't bring yourself to. Years later, food still dominated your life. You never wasted anything. You cleaned every plate. You saved bones. You froze leftovers. You stored cans in the basement, just in case. You taught your children to eat everything. You don't throw food away, you told them. You're lucky to have it. They didn't understand at first. You didn't expect them to. You cooked constantly. It was your therapy. Soup. Stews. Fresh bread. Everything you dreamed of. Feeding people made you feel safe. Watching someone eat without fear. That was healing. You still had food dreams. Even decades later. You dreamed about sitting at your childhood table. About your mother ladling soup into your bowl. About the smell of onions frying. Sometimes you woke up hungry. Even if you had just eaten dinner. You learned to live with that. You learned that hunger wasn't just in the stomach. It lived in the memory too. And memory had a better appetite. You survived. The war ended. The camps were liberated. The gates opened. The guards fled or were arrested. You were free to leave. But nothing about freedom felt simple. You were put on a truck. Taken to a temporary shelter. Given a blanket, a piece of bread, and a cup of weak tea. You drank it without tasting it. You didn't know where to go next. You had no address, no family, no job, no country that claimed you. You were alive, but you weren't whole. That was the beginning of the aftershock. You spent your first weeks in a displaced persons camp. Rows of beds, all filled with people like you. Survivors. You didn't talk much at first. You looked around. Everyone was thin, pale, coughing. Some cried. Some stared at the walls for hours. You didn't cry. Not then. You just waited. The doctors examined you. They gave you vitamins, shots, hot meals. You ate because they told you to. You didn't feel hunger the way you used to. You were told to rest. You lay down but couldn't sleep. You kept hearing voices, barked commands, footsteps, screams. Even though you knew you were safe, your body didn't believe it. When someone knocked on the door, you flinched. When someone gave you food, you checked behind you to make sure no one else was watching. You got a new identity card. It had your name and date of birth. It didn't mention what you had been through. Nothing about your number. Nothing about your missing family. Just a photo. You didn't recognise yourself in it. You applied for immigration. Some countries said yes. Some said no. Some said the quota was full. You ended up in a new country, with a new language. A sponsor met you at the train station, gave you clothes, a room to sleep in, a job at a factory. It was all generous, but you felt out of place. Everyone around you looked well fed, clean, relaxed. They didn't look over their shoulders. They didn't avoid lines. They didn't hesitate before walking into a building. You did. Every day. You started to build a life. Slowly. You went to work. You bought groceries. You learnt the new language. You found a synagogue. You joined others for Friday night meals. You told people you were from Europe. You didn't say where. You didn't say what had happened. They didn't ask. That was normal. People didn't want to hear details. The war was over. Time to move on. So you kept it inside. The memories didn't fade. They just stayed quiet during the day. At night they came back. You had nightmares. You saw faces. Heard gunshots. You woke up sweating. Sometimes screaming. You slept with the light on. Sometimes you didn't sleep at all. You started keeping food in your room. Just a little. Bread. A can of beans. A candy bar. Not because you needed it, but because you couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if it disappeared. You never threw food away. Never left your plate unfinished. You watched others do it and felt sick. You married another survivor. She understood. You didn't talk about the camps, but you didn't need to. You both slept lightly. You both kept towels by the door. You both avoided crowds. You both knew what it meant when someone wore a uniform. You had children. You didn't tell them everything. You told them enough. They asked about the tattoo on your arm. You said it was from the war. They asked if it hurt. You said not as much as the rest of it. You tried to give them a normal life. You worked. You saved. You sent them to school. You made sure they never went hungry. You made sure they always had shoes that fit. You kept the blinds closed at night. You taught them not to trust authority blindly. You told them to ask questions. You told them to speak up when others were silent. You didn't talk about death, but you always lit candles. You always kept a list of names folded in your wallet. People called you careful, quiet, strong. You didn't feel strong. You felt like you were still hiding. Sometimes you forgot things on purpose. You didn't want to remember what your mother looked like the day she was taken. You didn't want to remember the sound your brother made when the guards hit him. You remembered anyway. The aftershock came in small moments. Hearing German spoken in public. Smelling something that reminded you of the barracks. Seeing children in uniforms. Visiting a train station. It came in your body. Your back ached from the years of hard labour. Your teeth were bad from malnutrition. Your digestion never quite recovered. It came in your mind. Sudden panic when nothing was wrong. Long silences when someone asked a simple question. The inability to feel joy without guilt. You felt guilty for surviving, for eating, for laughing, for having a warm bed when others never had the chance. You didn't talk about it. You just lived with it. The aftershock lasted decades. You tried therapy. Once. The doctor was polite, but young. He didn't understand. You left after 3 sessions. You kept working. You retired. You joined survivor groups. You went to a few events. Some people talked about healing. You didn't believe in healing. You believed in living with what happened. That was enough. You learned how to function, how to smile, how to enjoy a birthday, a wedding, a walk in the park, but it always lived under the surface. Even in peace, you felt like a guest. Even in your own home, you kept a bag packed just in case. You never completely unpacked your fear. You watched the world change. You watched new generations grow up. You watched people forget, or doubt, or deny. You spoke at a school once, told a class what had happened. A boy asked, "Why didn't you fight back?" You wanted to explain everything. The years before, the fear, the laws, the helplessness. You just said, "We tried." That night you couldn't sleep. The aftershock never stopped completely. It became manageable. Background noise. Part of you. But never gone. You aged. You watched friends die. You attended funerals. You lit candles for people who had no graves. You said Kaddish for people who were erased. You looked at your grandchildren and thought, they will never know what it felt like to be treated like garbage. You were glad. You never stopped checking the locks. Never stopped sitting near the exit. Never stopped watching who was in the room. Even when there was no danger, your mind looked for it. That was the cost. That was the aftershock. It didn't end with the liberation. It just moved in and stayed